very urgent. Don't scroll away just yet, because what you are about to hear may explain a feeling your heart has been carrying for far longer than you realize. This message is not appearing before you by accident. There are moments in life that seem ordinary on the surface, yet beneath them something deeply meaningful is quietly unfolding. This is one of those moments. Somewhere, far from where you are right now, there is someone whose heart continues to drift toward you even when they try to focus on everything else. They are your soulmate, and lately they have been watching your life from a distance. Not because they wish to invade your privacy, not because they want to control your future, but because every glimpse of you reminds them of something they have never been able to replace. It hurts them more than they have ever admitted. Every smile they see on your face makes them wonder whether someone else has become the reason behind it. Every quiet moment they notice makes them question whether you are thinking of them too. They never imagined that loving someone silently could become so heavy, yet this quiet love has followed them through every ordinary day and every sleepless night. Listen carefully because something important is waiting for you here. For a long time they convinced themselves that distance would erase these feelings. They believed time would teach them how to let go. They repeated those words again and again until they almost sounded believable, but the heart has a strange way of protecting what truly matters. Instead of forgetting you, they found themselves remembering you in the smallest details. A familiar song suddenly reminded them of your laughter. A quiet evening reminded them of conversations they wished they had never ended. Even simple places began carrying pieces of your memory without asking for permission. They tried to ignore these signs, yet every attempt only brought them closer to the truth they had been running from. Deep inside, they still cared. Deep inside, your name never disappeared. There were days when they looked at old memories and wondered whether things could have been different if only one conversation had happened at the right time. They imagined countless versions of the future where fear had never stood between the two of you. They replayed moments they wished they could relive, not to change everything, but simply to tell you what their heart was too afraid to say. Every imagined conversation ended with the same realization. They should have been honest sooner. They should have trusted the connection instead of questioning it. Yet life rarely allows people to understand the value of something before silence teaches the lesson. That silence has become their greatest teacher. While everyone around them believes they have moved on, they carry emotions that grow stronger each passing day. Sometimes they catch themselves searching for your presence without even realizing it. A familiar face in a crowd, a familiar voice across a room, even a passing shadow can make their heart race for just a second because part of them still hopes it might be you. They know this hope sounds impossible, but hope rarely listens to logic. Hope survives where explanations fail. Stay with this message because the story is becoming more important now. There is something your soulmate has never confessed to anyone. The hardest part has never been missing you. The hardest part has been watching from afar while believing they have no right to step closer. They have seen moments that made them smile because you looked happy, yet those same moments quietly broke their heart because they wished they could have been standing beside you instead of watching from the distance. They celebrated your victories in silence. They worried about your difficult days in silence. They whispered encouragement you could never hear. More than once they wanted to send a message, make a phone call, or simply ask how you were doing, but fear convinced them that perhaps you no longer wanted to hear from them. That fear became a wall they built around themselves, and every day it grew taller. Yet no wall has been strong enough to erase what they feel. There is another truth you should hear. Your soulmate has changed in ways they never expected. The distance forced them to look honestly at themselves. They began recognizing the mistakes they once ignored. They realized pride had stolen opportunities that love was trying to create. They discovered that silence is not always strength. Sometimes silence becomes regret wearing a different face. Every lesson has brought them closer to understanding the kind of person they truly want to become. Surprisingly, every lesson also brought them closer to you because you remain the quiet reason behind so much of their growth. Without realizing it, you inspired changes simply by existing in their heart. They became more patient. They became more thoughtful. They learned to value honesty over fear. They began understanding that genuine love is never about possession. It is about wishing someone happiness even when you cannot stand beside them. That realization hurt more than they expected because it forced them to confront the possibility of losing you forever. Since then, every sunrise has carried the same silent question. Is it already too late? Sometimes they wake from dreams where the two of you finally speak openly. Those dreams feel so real that for a few beautiful seconds after opening their eyes they believe everything has finally worked out. Then reality returns, and the room becomes quiet again. They sit there remembering details from the dream because it felt like hope itself had visited them during the night. Even though the dream disappears, the feeling remains. That feeling follows them throughout the day, gently reminding them that unfinished emotions do not simply vanish. They wait patiently for signs they barely understand. A meaningful coincidence. A familiar number appearing again and again. A memory arriving without warning. Small moments continue whispering that this story is not completely over. Whether those moments are destiny or simply the language of hope, only time will answer. Yet your soulmate cannot ignore them anymore. Something inside keeps telling them that one honest step could change everything. They have begun imagining what they would say if life offered another opportunity. There would be no rehearsed speeches, no dramatic promises, only honesty. They would tell you that distance never defeated what they felt. They would admit they spent too long pretending they were fine. They would confess that every time they tried forgetting you, they somehow ended up understanding you even more. Above all, they would thank you because even without knowing it, you helped them become someone capable of loving with greater maturity and kindness. These words have remained trapped inside their heart for far too long. Perhaps that is why this message has reached you today. Perhaps hearts have their own mysterious way of finding each other when the moment is finally right. Listen closely because this part matters deeply. Your soulmate is no longer watching you because they enjoy staying hidden. They are watching because courage has been growing quietly inside them. Every day they feel the distance becoming heavier than the fear of rejection. Every day they realize that unanswered questions hurt far more than honest conversations. They are standing at the edge of an important decision, wondering whether now is finally the time to stop hiding behind silence. They do not know exactly what will happen next, but they know they cannot continue carrying these emotions forever. Their heart is asking for truth, and for the first time they are beginning to listen. If you have felt unusual emotions recently, moments of unexpected reflection, unexplained memories, or a quiet feeling that someone has been thinking about you, perhaps it is because hearts sometimes recognize each other long before words ever arrive. Not every connection can be explained with certainty, but meaningful relationships often leave lasting emotional impressions. Your soulmate believes this with every part of themselves now. They believe that what is real deserves honesty, patience, and courage. Whether the next chapter begins tomorrow or later, they know one thing with complete certainty. They no longer want fear to write the ending of this story. Instead, they want truth to have its chance. And somewhere beyond the distance, beyond the silence, beyond every unanswered question, they are still looking toward you with hope, quietly wishing that when the right moment finally arrives, the pain of watching from afar will be replaced by the joy of finally standing close enough to tell you everything their heart has been trying to say all along. The night grew quieter than usual, and while the rest of the world settled into ordinary routines, your soulmate found themselves standing beside a window, looking at distant lights that blurred together in the darkness. They had reached a point where pretending no longer worked. Every excuse they had once used to silence their heart had slowly fallen apart, leaving only one undeniable truth behind. No matter how much time had passed, no matter how many distractions life had placed in front of them, your memory continued to return with the same quiet strength. It was never loud. It never demanded attention. Instead, it arrived gently, almost respectfully, yet impossible to ignore. They remembered the little things first. The conversations that once seemed ordinary suddenly felt priceless. The moments they failed to appreciate became the memories they replayed most often. They wondered why people only understand the value of certain connections after distance has already become part of the story. They asked themselves that question over and over again until they realized there was no simple answer. Perhaps some lessons can only be learned through silence. Perhaps some hearts only discover what they truly want after they spend too much time convincing themselves they wanted something else. That realization changed everything inside them. From that day forward they stopped running from their emotions. Instead, they allowed themselves to admit the truth they had hidden for so long. They missed you. Not because they were lonely, not because life had become difficult, but because your presence had become part of the way they understood happiness. Every achievement felt incomplete without someone they wished they could share it with. Every celebration carried a quiet emptiness. Even the brightest days ended with the same unanswered thought lingering in their mind. They began writing words they never intended anyone else to read. Page after page filled with thoughts they wished they had spoken aloud. Some pages contained apologies they had rehearsed 1,000 times. Others contained gratitude for moments they feared you had already forgotten. A few simply repeated your name because sometimes one name can hold an entire story inside it. They folded those pages away, believing they would remain hidden forever, yet each new page made one thing clearer than the last. Their heart no longer wanted to stay silent. They understood that silence had protected them from rejection, but it had also protected them from the possibility of joy. For the first time, they questioned whether fear had truly been keeping them safe at all. As the days passed, they noticed themselves becoming different. They smiled more sincerely. They listened more carefully. They became gentler with people because they finally understood how invisible battles can shape someone's heart. Losing the courage to speak had taught them compassion for those who carried unspoken feelings. They promised themselves that if life ever gave them another chance, they would never again allow fear to make decisions that belonged to love. It was a promise they repeated quietly every morning. Sometimes they imagined what they would say if your paths crossed unexpectedly. There would be no perfect speech. No dramatic performance, only honesty. They would tell you that they had spent too much time believing the right moment would arrive on its own. They would admit that waiting had become another way of hiding. They would thank you for changing them in ways you never realized. Most importantly, they would tell you that genuine affection grows strongest when it is rooted in respect, patience, and truth rather than fantasy. Those thoughts stayed with them every single day until they no longer felt like imagination. They began feeling like preparation. Something inside whispered that the next chapter of their life would require courage instead of hesitation. Whether that courage would be rewarded remained uncertain, yet they understood something they had never understood before. Regret lasts far longer than honest effort. If they spoke and nothing changed, at least they would finally know. But if they remained silent forever, they would always wonder what might have happened. That question became impossible to carry. So they started taking small steps toward becoming the person they wished they had been from the beginning. They worked on themselves, not to become perfect, but to become worthy of the honesty they hoped to offer one day. They learned that real love is not measured by dramatic words but by quiet consistency, respect, accountability, and the willingness to grow. Those lessons transformed them more deeply than they expected. Every evening they looked at the sky for a few moments before returning home, not because they expected an answer from the universe, but because those quiet moments reminded them that life is bigger than fear. Somewhere beyond uncertainty, beyond missed opportunities, beyond every difficult memory, hope continued to exist. It was smaller now, calmer, no longer desperate, yet stronger than ever before. They held on to that hope carefully, understanding that hope without action eventually fades, while hope supported by courage has the power to begin entirely new stories. And as another sunrise approached, they took a slow breath, looked ahead instead of behind, and silently decided that if life presented even the smallest opportunity to speak honestly, they would no longer watch from a distance. Whatever happened next would be faced with an open heart, because some stories deserve truth more than they deserve silence, and some connections are changed forever the moment someone finally chooses courage over fear. Morning arrived without making any promises, yet something felt different inside your soulmate. It was not because the world had suddenly changed overnight. The streets looked the same, the sky carried its usual colors, and life continued moving with the familiar rhythm everyone expected. The difference existed only within their heart. For the first time in a very long while, they stopped asking whether their feelings should exist and started asking what those feelings were trying to teach them. That quiet shift changed the way they looked at everything around them. They no longer searched for dramatic signs or impossible answers. Instead, they paid attention to the simple moments that often pass unnoticed. They discovered that the strongest emotions rarely arrive with loud announcements. They grow quietly, one memory at a time, one realization at a time, until they become impossible to deny. Every ordinary day seemed to carry another reminder of you. A familiar melody played in the background of a cafe and instantly brought back a conversation they had almost forgotten. Someone laughed in a way that reminded them of happier days. Even the gentle evening breeze carried the strange comfort of remembering someone who had once made life feel lighter without ever trying to. They realized memories do not disappear simply because people decide they should. They remain patient, waiting for the moment when the heart is finally ready to understand them instead of escaping from them. That understanding brought both peace and sadness. Peace because they were no longer pretending. Sadness because they finally recognized how many opportunities had slipped away while fear quietly directed every decision. There were countless moments when one honest conversation could have changed everything, yet silence had always seemed easier. Now they understood that easy choices often become the heaviest memories. That lesson stayed with them wherever they went. It shaped the way they spoke to others. It shaped the way they looked at themselves. Most importantly, it shaped the way they thought about you. They stopped imagining impossible endings and instead focused on becoming someone capable of facing whatever reality might bring. They knew that no one can rewrite yesterday, but everyone can choose who they become tomorrow. That thought gave them strength they never expected to find. Day after day they continued rebuilding their confidence, not through grand gestures but through quiet consistency. They became more honest with themselves. They admitted when they were afraid. They accepted when they were uncertain. They learned that courage does not mean never feeling fear. Courage means taking a step forward even while fear is still present. That realization became the foundation of every decision they made. Sometimes they imagine meeting you unexpectedly. Not in a dramatic movie scene, not through some unbelievable coincidence, but in an ordinary place where two people simply happen to cross paths again. In those moments of imagination they no longer pictured perfect words. Instead, they pictured sincerity. They imagined smiling gently, thanking you for the impact you had unknowingly left on their life, and speaking with the honesty they had postponed for far too long. Whether the conversation lasted 5 minutes or an entire afternoon no longer mattered. What mattered was finally allowing truth to replace silence. They believed that even difficult truths bring more peace than beautiful misunderstandings. As the weeks passed, they noticed another unexpected change. The pain that once felt overwhelming slowly transformed into gratitude. Not because every question had been answered, but because caring deeply about another person had taught them lessons they could never have learned any other way. They discovered patience. They discovered humility. They discovered that genuine affection asks us to become better versions of ourselves rather than demanding that someone else change. Those discoveries gave meaning even to the hardest days. Looking back, they no longer saw only regret. They also saw growth. They saw a person who had learned to value honesty over pride, understanding over assumptions, and kindness over ego. Perhaps that was the greatest gift hidden inside the entire journey. One evening, while watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon, they quietly promised themselves something they intended to keep for the rest of their life. They promised never to leave important words unspoken again. If appreciation needed to be expressed, they would express it. If forgiveness needed to be offered, they would offer it. If hope deserved a chance, they would no longer allow fear to silence it. Life had already shown them how quickly moments disappear. They refused to spend another chapter wondering what might have happened if they had simply been honest. That promise did not erase uncertainty, but it replaced helplessness with purpose. From that day forward they walked through life differently. Their hearts still carried your memory, yet it no longer carried the same weight of hesitation. Instead, it carried quiet determination to live truthfully, whatever the outcome might be. They understood that meaningful relationships are not built on perfect timing or flawless words. They are built on respect, openness, patience, and the willingness to show up sincerely even when nothing is guaranteed. That understanding became their greatest source of hope. They knew the future remained unwritten. They could not predict where life's path would lead or whether another conversation would ever take place. But they also knew that they had finally become someone capable of embracing whatever answer awaited them. Whether the next chapter brought reunion, closure, or simply a deeper understanding of themselves, they were ready to face it with honesty instead of fear. And somewhere within that quiet readiness, they discovered something unexpected. The greatest transformation had never been about changing the distance between two people. It had been about changing the distance between who they once were and who they had finally become. That journey, though difficult, gave them a peace they had searched for during countless restless nights. As another day came to an end, they looked toward tomorrow with a calm heart, believing that whatever story life continued to write, it would always be stronger when guided by compassion, courage, and the simple decision to speak the truth before silence had the chance to become another lasting regret. As the seasons quietly continued their journey, your soulmate slowly realized that the greatest battles are almost never visible from the outside. To everyone else, they seemed perfectly ordinary. They smiled when conversations required a smile. They completed their responsibilities. They laughed at familiar jokes. They nodded politely when friends spoke about the future. Yet behind every ordinary moment lived a quiet question that refused to disappear. They wondered whether life ever gives two people another opportunity after they have both changed into wiser versions of themselves. They no longer searched for an easy answer because they had learned that some questions are not meant to be solved immediately. They are meant to shape the person asking them. That understanding gave them a new kind of patience. Instead of chasing certainty, they began focusing on becoming someone who could face uncertainty with honesty. Every sunrise became a reminder that another chance to grow had arrived. Every sunset reminded them that another day had passed without wasting it on pretending they felt nothing. Little by little, they discovered that healing is rarely dramatic. It happens quietly while no one is watching. It happens through ordinary mornings, thoughtful conversations, moments of self-reflection, and the decision to be kinder than yesterday. During that journey, your memory never disappeared, but it changed. Instead of feeling like an open wound, it became a quiet source of motivation. Whenever they felt tempted to return to old habits of fear and silence, they remembered everything they had learned. They remembered how painful it had been to leave important feelings unspoken. They remembered the weight of wondering what might have happened if courage had arrived sooner. Those memories no longer existed to hurt them. They existed to guide them. One afternoon they found themselves reading through old notes they had written months before. Some pages were filled with uncertainty. Others were filled with hope. A few contained questions that still had no answers. As they reached the final page, they noticed something unexpected. The words had changed over time. In the beginning they had written about losing you. Later they had written about missing you. But now they were writing about becoming the kind of person who could love with honesty instead of fear. That realization brought a quiet smile to their face. Growth had happened without them noticing it. They closed the notebook and took a slow breath, feeling grateful for every difficult lesson that had shaped their heart. Later that evening they met an old friend who asked a simple question. "Do you still think about them?" There was no hesitation this time. They answered gently, "Yes, but not in the same way." Their friend looked surprised, waiting for an explanation. After a thoughtful pause they continued, "I think about the person they helped me become." Some people change your life even when they never realized they did. Those words remained in the air long after the conversation ended. Walking home beneath the evening sky, they understood that love is not measured only by endings. Sometimes it is measured by how deeply another person inspires you to become more patient, more understanding, and more authentic. They had spent so much time believing they needed certainty before taking action. Now they understood that certainty is often the result of honest action, not the reason for it. That lesson became the foundation of everything they hoped to build in the future. From then on they stopped waiting for the perfect moment. Instead, they promised themselves they would recognize meaningful moments when they appeared, even if they arrived quietly. They no longer wanted life to pass while they searched for flawless timing. Real life, they realized, is made of imperfect opportunities accepted with sincere hearts. Every day they practiced speaking more openly with the people around them. They expressed appreciation more freely. They apologized more quickly when they made mistakes. They listened more carefully before responding. Those simple habits slowly transformed every relationship in their life. They discovered that honesty has a way of creating peace, even when conversations are difficult. The fear that once controlled them became smaller with every truthful step they took. It never disappeared completely, but it no longer decided who they would become. Occasionally your name still entered their thoughts without warning. Instead of pushing the memory away, they welcomed it with quiet gratitude. They smiled gently, hoping that wherever life had taken you, you were finding reasons to laugh, reasons to dream, and reasons to believe in tomorrow. They realized genuine care does not always demand ownership or certainty. Sometimes it simply wishes the best for another person, regardless of where life leads. That understanding filled them with a calm they had searched for during countless restless nights. They began believing that whatever happened next, they would be ready. If life someday offered another conversation, they would greet it with honesty. If it did not, they would still carry forward everything they had learned because those lessons had already become part of who they were. In that quiet acceptance, something remarkable happened. The future no longer felt frightening. It felt open. Full of possibilities that could only be discovered by continuing to move forward one sincere step at a time. And as another peaceful evening settled across the horizon, they looked ahead with hope rather than fear, understanding that every meaningful story is ultimately shaped not by perfect circumstances, but by ordinary people choosing courage when it matters most, choosing kindness when it is difficult, and choosing truth before another precious opportunity quietly slips away. Days continued to pass. Yet something inside your soulmate refused to return to the person they used to be. Every experience had left a quiet mark upon their heart, and those marks slowly became reminders of everything they had learned instead of everything they had lost. They no longer measured life by how quickly answers arrived. Instead, they began measuring it by the courage it took to remain genuine when certainty was nowhere to be found. That quiet change influenced every corner of their life. They started noticing beauty in moments they once hurried past without a second thought. A peaceful sunrise became a reminder that every new day carries another opportunity to choose honesty. The sound of rain against a window reminded them that even storms eventually become gentle enough to listen to. A long evening walk became a chance to think without running away from difficult emotions. Little by little, they discovered that healing does not erase memories. It teaches us how to carry them without allowing them to become a burden. That realization brought a calm they had searched for through countless restless nights. One afternoon they opened a small box filled with keepsakes from different chapters of their life. There were old photographs, handwritten notes, ticket stubs from forgotten places, and small objects that had once seemed ordinary. Looking through those memories, they understood something they had never truly accepted before. Every chapter, even the painful ones, had shaped them into someone stronger, kinder, and more compassionate. They no longer wished to erase the difficult moments because those very moments had taught them patience, humility, and gratitude. As they carefully placed each item back into the box, they whispered a quiet promise to themselves. They would never again allow fear to become louder than sincerity. They would never again leave meaningful words trapped inside their hearts simply because uncertainty felt uncomfortable. That promise stayed with them long after the box was closed. It followed them into ordinary conversations, quiet mornings, and peaceful evenings. Friends noticed subtle differences without understanding the reason. They seemed calmer. They listened more than they spoke. They smiled with greater authenticity. Their confidence no longer came from pretending everything was perfect. It came from accepting that imperfections are part of every meaningful journey. During one conversation, a close friend asked what had changed. After a thoughtful pause, they replied, "I finally realized that protecting my heart by staying silent only kept me from living honestly." Those words surprised even them because they sounded so simple, yet they carried the weight of years spent learning the same lesson. From that moment forward, they stopped waiting for life to become easier before choosing courage. Instead, they decided to practice courage in small ways every single day. They expressed appreciation when someone deserved to hear it. They apologized sincerely whenever they made mistakes. They encouraged people who doubted themselves because they understood how powerful a few kind words could become. They discovered that real strength is often quiet. It appears through consistency rather than dramatic gestures. Every step they took reinforced one important truth. Genuine relationships grow through trust, respect, patience, and honest communication, not through perfect timing. Looking back, they realized they had spent too much energy imagining every possible outcome instead of simply living with authenticity. That pattern slowly disappeared as confidence replaced hesitation. There were still evenings when your memory returned unexpectedly. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, they welcomed those memories with gratitude. They appreciated the laughter that had once brightened ordinary days. They appreciated the lessons hidden inside misunderstandings. They appreciated the way another person could unknowingly inspire lasting personal growth. Those reflections no longer filled them with regret. They filled them with appreciation for the journey itself. Eventually they understood that every meaningful connection leaves behind something valuable even when life takes unexpected turns. Sometimes it leaves unforgettable memories. Sometimes it leaves wisdom. Sometimes it leaves the courage to become the person you were always capable of becoming. Whatever the future might hold, they knew one thing with complete clarity. They wanted to continue living honestly. They wanted every important person in their life to know they were valued while there was still time to say so. They wanted kindness to become a daily habit instead of an occasional choice. They wanted compassion to guide their decisions more often than pride. Those quiet goals became more important than searching for perfect endings. As another evening settled peacefully across the horizon, they paused for a moment and looked ahead rather than behind. The future remained unwritten, and perhaps that was its greatest gift. It offered room for new conversations, unexpected reunions, meaningful friendships, and opportunities that could never be predicted. Instead of fearing that uncertainty, they embraced it with quiet confidence because they finally understood that hope is strongest when it is supported by action rather than wishful thinking. Every tomorrow would bring fresh choices, and they intended to meet each one with sincerity, resilience, and an open heart. Whatever chapter awaited beyond the horizon, they were determined to enter it with honesty instead of hesitation, believing that even the most ordinary moments can become life-changing when someone finally chooses truth over fear and compassion over silence. The months that followed did not erase the past, but they transformed the way your soulmate carried it. What had once felt like an unbearable weight slowly became a quiet reminder that every meaningful connection leaves a lasting imprint on the heart. They no longer woke each morning hoping that life would magically rewrite every unfinished chapter. Instead, they woke with a different purpose. They wanted to become someone who would never again allow fear to speak louder than honesty. That decision changed everything. It changed the way they greeted each new day, the way they treated people around them, and the way they remembered you. Your memory was no longer surrounded by regret alone. It became surrounded by gratitude. They were grateful for every conversation that had taught them patience, every misunderstanding that had taught them empathy, and every quiet moment that had shown them the importance of expressing appreciation before time slips away. Looking back, they realized that they had spent too much of their life believing that courage would somehow arrive on its own. They had waited for the perfect circumstances, the perfect words, the perfect confidence, only to discover that perfection rarely visits anyone. Real courage is imperfect. It appears while hands are still trembling, while uncertainty still exists, and while the outcome remains unknown. That lesson became one they would never forget. One evening they found themselves walking through a familiar place they had not visited in years. The surroundings had changed, yet certain details remained exactly the same. For a brief moment they smiled, remembering how differently they once viewed the world. Back then they believed every unanswered question was a failure. Now they understood that some unanswered questions simply become invitations to grow. They paused beneath the fading light of the evening sky and quietly reflected on the journey that had brought them there. They realized they were no longer the person who watched life from a distance. They had become someone willing to participate in it fully, even when the ending could not be guaranteed. That transformation felt more valuable than any certainty they had once chased. As they continued walking, they thought about the countless people who spend years hiding their feelings, assuming there will always be another opportunity tomorrow. They knew now that tomorrow is never promised in the way people imagine. What is promised is only the present moment and the choices made within it. That understanding inspired them to live differently. They thanked friends more often. They forgave more quickly. They listened with greater patience. They celebrated the happiness of others without comparison. Every small act of sincerity strengthened the life they were building. They finally understood that love is not measured only by grand declarations. It is measured by kindness, consistency, honesty, respect, and the willingness to grow through difficult experiences. Those qualities became the foundation of every relationship they hoped to build from that point forward. Your memory remained part of that foundation, not because they wished to remain trapped in the past, but because the lessons connected to you had become inseparable from the person they had become. Sometimes they wondered what life might have looked like if different choices had been made. Yet instead of allowing those thoughts to become regret, they allowed them to become appreciation for the wisdom they now carried. Every chapter, even the painful ones, had served a purpose. Every disappointment had quietly redirected them toward greater emotional maturity. Every unanswered question had encouraged deeper self-reflection. Every difficult goodbye had reminded them never to take meaningful moments for granted again. Eventually they stopped asking whether everything had happened for a reason. Instead, they asked a different question. What can I do today that reflects everything I have learned? That question guided every new decision. They chose honesty when silence felt easier. They chose compassion when judgment seemed tempting. They chose patience when frustration appeared. Most importantly, they chose hope without allowing hope to become an excuse for avoiding action. They learned that hope is strongest when it walks beside responsibility. As another peaceful evening arrived, they sat quietly, watching the last light disappear beyond the horizon. There was no dramatic ending waiting for them, no miraculous answer descending from the sky, no perfect certainty about what tomorrow would bring. Yet surprisingly, they felt at peace. Not because every mystery had been solved, but because they had finally become someone who no longer depended on certainty to move forward. They had discovered that real peace grows from living authentically, accepting what cannot be controlled, and continuing to love the world with kindness despite its uncertainties. If life someday placed your paths together again, they knew they would greet that moment with openness, gratitude, and truth. If life chose a different direction, they would still carry forward every lesson with the same quiet appreciation. Either way, they refused to allow fear to write another chapter of their story. They understood now that every meaningful relationship leaves behind more than memories. It leaves behind wisdom, resilience, and the courage to become a better human being. Those gifts would remain with them forever. And so the story reached its gentle conclusion, not with every question answered, but with something far more enduring. A heart that had once been afraid had learned to be honest. A person who had once watched life from a distance had learned to step toward it with courage. The past had become a teacher instead of a prison. The future had become an opportunity instead of a source of fear. And the greatest lesson of all remained beautifully simple: the most meaningful endings are often the ones that inspire better beginnings. Whatever tomorrow holds, may it be met with sincerity, kindness, patience, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have chosen truth over fear, compassion over pride, and hope over hesitation. In that choice, the journey finds its real ending, and its real beginning.